American Shorthair cat believes Bobcat Kitten is her baby. The ending will melt your heart. The grandfather clock in the corner of the living room had belonged to Beatrice's mother, and it had survived 3 moves, 2 floods, and countless Montana winters. Its pendulum swung with the same steady rhythm it had kept for 60 years, marking time in a house that had grown too quiet. Eldon Brooks sat at the kitchen table with a fountain pen between his fingers, the kind Beatrice had given him on their 30th anniversary, and tried to find words that wouldn't sound like an old man making excuses. "Dear Michael," he wrote, then paused. His son preferred Mike now, had for years, but Eldon couldn't seem to make the adjustment. "I hope this letter finds you well in Seattle. The weather here has turned cold early this year. Don't worry about me, I'm doing fine. Just a little too much quiet. Maybe, but nothing I can't handle." Eldon reread the line and felt its inadequacy. A little too quiet didn't capture the way silence had become a living thing in the house, settling into corners like dust, making even his own footsteps sound intrusive. He wanted to write about how he still set 2 coffee cups out each morning by habit, how he turned to tell Beatrice things before remembering she wasn't there. He set the pen down and folded the letter without finishing it, adding it to the small stack of similar half-written attempts in the drawer. Through the window above the sink, he could see the first autumn rain beginning to fall, gentle at first, then harder, turning the dirt road that led to his property into ribbons of mud. The wild plum tree near the fence line swayed in the wind, its branches nearly bare now. Preparing for winter, his eyes drifted upward to the high shelf beside the refrigerator where a wooden box sat, the walnut surface polished smooth by Beatrice's hands over many years. He didn't need to open it to know what was inside a photograph of Beatrice holding a tiny gray kitten, her face bright with the kind of joy that seemed to radiate from the picture itself. On the back, in her careful handwriting, "Keep loving Eldon, no matter who, no matter what creature." She had written that 3 days before the stroke took her, as if she'd known somehow that he would need the reminder. That had been 2 years ago, and the house had felt emptier than he thought possible until Marble arrived. The American Shorthair had shown up one spring morning, heavily pregnant and seeking shelter under his porch. Eldon had put out food, then water, then eventually opened the door. She'd walked in like she owned the place and given birth to 4 kittens in the laundry room that very night. He'd named them Buns, Caramel, Pepper, and Jam, all food names because Beatrice had always done that with their cats, and it felt like honoring her memory. Jam had been the smallest, a delicate calico with white paws. She'd been the one who followed Eldon everywhere, who slept on his pillow and purred against his cheek in the early mornings. Then one day last spring, Jam had slipped out when he was bringing in groceries. He'd searched for hours, calling her name until his voice went hoarse, but she never came back. He'd found her 2 days later under the wild plum tree, taken by something quick and wild, a coyote, maybe, or a hawk. Marble had sat by the grave he'd dug for 3 days straight, not eating, barely moving. Eldon had understood. Grief was something that didn't care whether you walked on 2 legs or 4. Now, as the autumn rain turned into a proper storm, wind rattling the windows and thunder rolling across the distant mountains, Eldon checked on the cats. Buns, Caramel, and Pepper were curled together on the braided rug near the fireplace, a tangle of gray, orange, and black fur. But Marble wasn't with them. He stood up, joints protesting, and walked through the house calling her name. Nothing. He opened the front door and cold rain immediately lashed his face, soaking through his flannel shirt in seconds. "Marble!" he shouted into the storm. That's when he heard it, a cry, faint but desperate, cutting through the sound of rain and wind. Not Marble's voice. Something else. Something wild. He squinted through the downpour and saw her then, a gray shape huddled against the side of the house near the woodpile. Marble, completely soaked, her fur plastered to her body, shivering violently. But she wasn't alone. Curled against her chest, shielded by her body from the worst of the rain, was a tiny spotted creature no bigger than Eldon's hand, a Bobcat Kitten. Eldon stood frozen for a moment, rain pouring down his face, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The kitten was barely moving, its eyes closed, one of its back legs bent at an unnatural angle. Marble looked up at him with those green eyes that had seen loss just as he had, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. He scooped them both up, Marble and the kitten together, and carried them inside. The fire was already burning low, so he added 2 more logs and stoked it until flames leaped high. He grabbed every towel he could find and laid them near the hearth, then gently set Marble and the kitten down. The other cats woke up and gathered around, curious but calm, as if Marble had explained the situation to them somehow. The Bobcat Kitten was in bad shape. Beyond the injured leg, he was severely underweight, his ribs showing through his wet, matted fur. His breathing was shallow and rapid. Eldon had no idea how old he was, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8, but he knew that without help. The little guy wouldn't make it through the night. He picked up the phone and dialed Charlotte Reeves, his neighbor who lived about a mile down the road. She was 23, studying to be a veterinary technician, and had helped him with the cats before. She answered on the third ring. "Charlotte, it's Eldon. I need your help. Can you come over? Now in this storm. It's an emergency. I've got an injured Bobcat Kitten here, and I'll be there in 10 minutes. She arrived in 8, her yellow rain jacket dripping water all over his entryway. Charlotte was tall and practical, with brown hair pulled back in a perpetual ponytail and hands that were steady and sure. She took one look at the kitten and immediately knelt down beside the fire. "Okay," she said, already pulling supplies from the bag she'd brought. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Marble never left the kitten's side as Charlotte examined him. Marble watched every movement with intense focus, occasionally reaching out with one paw to touch the kitten's head. When Charlotte had to manipulate the injured leg to assess the damage, Marble made a low sound in her throat, not threatening, but concerned. "Looks like a fracture," Charlotte said. "Not too bad, actually, clean break. With some splinting and rest, it should heal fine. He's dehydrated and malnourished. Though, where did you find him?" "I didn't. Marble did. She brought him in from the storm." Charlotte glanced at Marble with something like wonder in her eyes. "She rescued him, apparently. That's, that's incredible. I mean, bobcats and domestic cats are related, but still, she must have heard him crying." Eldon watched as Charlotte carefully splinted the kitten's leg, Marble supervising the entire process. The kitten whimpered once, and Marble immediately began licking his head, her rough pink tongue working methodically through his fur. "He'll need to be fed every few hours," Charlotte said as she worked. "I've got some kitten formula in my truck, and he'll need antibiotics for that leg. I can get those tomorrow if the roads are passable." "I'll take care of him," Eldon said. Then, surprising himself, he added, "We'll take care of him, Marble and me." Charlotte smiled. "What are you going to name him?" Eldon thought about it. All his cats had food names: Pepper, Buns, Caramel, Jam. It was tradition, a way of keeping Beatrice's memory alive in small, daily moments. But this creature was different, wild, brought to him in a storm by a grieving cat who somehow understood loss and hope in equal measure. "Sage," he said finally. Charlotte tilted her head, puzzled. "Sage? But that's not, I mean, all your cats are named after food. Pepper, Buns, Caramel, and wasn't there one called Jam?" "That's true," Eldon said softly, watching Marble continue to clean the kitten's fur with patient, deliberate licks. "But sage is a healing herb, and somehow I think he's going to heal more than just himself." That first night was the longest. The storm raged outside while inside, Marble curled herself around Sage, keeping him warm. Eldon tried to feed the kitten with a bottle, but Sage didn't seem to understand what to do. He turned his head away, mewling weakly, too exhausted to fight but too confused to accept help. Marble solved the problem in a way that left Eldon speechless. She gently took Sage's head between her paws, holding him firmly but not roughly, and guided him toward her belly. Her own kittens had been weaned for months, but the instinct remained. She positioned Sage exactly where he needed to be, refusing to let him squirm away. Patient and insistent. After several attempts, Sage finally latched on. Marble made a sound deep in her chest, not quite a purr, something more complex. Relief. Maybe, or satisfaction at a problem solved. Eldon sat in his old recliner, Beatrice's blanket across his lap, and watched the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, through the rain-streaked windows, he could just make out the shape of the wild plum tree, its bare branches reaching toward the sky. In spring, it would bloom again. Life insisted on continuing, even after loss, especially after loss. He fell asleep in the chair and woke at dawn to find all four cats marble. Buns, Caramel, and Pepper curled around Sage in a protective circle. The Bobcat Kitten was sleeping peacefully, his breathing stronger, his tiny spotted body rising and falling in steady rhythm. Charlotte came back the next day with antibiotics and more formula. "He looks better already," she said, kneeling to examine Sage's leg. "Marble's doing a good job with him. She hasn't left his side except to use the litter box and eat." "Maternal instinct," Charlotte said, "even across species lines. I've read about this kind of thing, but I've never seen it in person. It's remarkable." Over the following weeks, Sage grew stronger. The fracture healed cleanly, and soon he was hobbling around the house on 3 legs. Then 4. He was curious about everything: the bookshelf, the grandfather clock, the strange box that showed moving pictures. The television had fascinated him for an entire afternoon. Marble followed him everywhere, correcting him when he got too rough with the other cats, cleaning him constantly, teaching him the rules of the household. Eldon established routines: morning feeding, afternoon playtime in the enclosed back porch, evening stories he'd taken to reading aloud from old adventure novels while the cats gathered around. Sage always closest to the fire, watching the flames with those intense golden eyes that missed nothing. He noticed that Sage had taken a particular interest in Caramel, the orange tabby who'd always been the most nervous of Marble's kittens. Caramel had been the runt, and Charlotte had mentioned that he might have some neurological sensitivity. Loud noises made him jump. Sudden movements sent him scrambling for cover, and thunderstorms left him trembling under the bed for hours. But with Sage around, something changed. When thunder rolled across the mountain in Mayans, Sage would find Caramel and wrap his tail already longer and more powerful than a domestic cat's around him. He'd sit perfectly still, a calm presence in the chaos, until Caramel's trembling subsided, when a car backfired on the road, startling all the cats. Sage would position himself between Caramel and the source of the noise, a living shield. "He's protecting him," Eldon said one afternoon when Charlotte stopped by with supplies. "More than that," she replied, watching Sage groom Caramel with careful licks. "He's teaching him how to be brave. Watch, Sage isn't making a big deal out of the scary stuff. He's just showing Caramel that the world doesn't end when something loud happens." As winter gave way to early spring, Sage began to test boundaries. He was bigger now, his legs longer, his paws huge compared to the domestic cats. His play fighting was no longer quite play. His instincts were emerging, wild and powerful. Once, he knocked over a lamp while chasing Pepper. Another time, he shredded the corner of the couch with claws that were designed for bringing down rabbits. Marble didn't tolerate it. When Sage jumped on the kitchen table, strictly forbidden, she stared at him with such intensity that he immediately jumped down. But the real lesson came when he stole food from Buns' bowl. Marble didn't hiss or swat. She simply ignored him for an entire day. Wouldn't look at him, wouldn't sleep near him, wouldn't groom him. Sage was devastated. He curled up alone in the corner, visibly distressed, making small sounds that were heartbreaking to hear. The next morning, Eldon watched as Sage pushed his own food bowl toward the others, waiting until they'd all eaten before he took a bite himself. Marble immediately went to him and gave him a single lick on the cheek. Then she settled down in her favorite spot by the window, and Sage joined her, careful to give her space but close enough to feel her warmth. Eldon stood at the kitchen counter, coffee growing cold in his hand, and felt something tight in his chest loosen. He remembered Beatrice with their son, the way she'd set firm boundaries but always backed them up with love. The stern look followed by the warm embrace. Discipline and devotion, inseparable. Outside, the wild plum tree was covered in pink blossoms, more brilliant than any year Eldon could remember. One afternoon in late May, Eldon took the cats out to the garden. Beatrice had planted a sprawling herb garden years ago, and Eldon had kept it alive as a tribute. While the kittens chased butterflies near the lavender, Sage stopped in front of a low, silvery green bush. He sniffed it intently, his large paws kneading the earth around its roots. "That's Sage, little one," Eldon murmured, kneeling beside him. "Your namesake." Sage looked up, then rubbed his cheek against the rough leaves, releasing their earthy, peppery scent into the air. He didn't crush the plant. He seemed to be introducing himself. Eldon watched, a lump in his throat. Beatrice used to say that sage was for wisdom and healing. Looking at this wild creature finding comfort in her garden, Eldon thought she might have been right. Spring turned to summer, and sage grew at an astonishing rate. By June, he was twice the size of Marble. By July, he was larger than any house cat had a right to be, all muscle and wild grace. Eldon found himself doing things he hadn't done in years, waking before dawn, tending the garden with real purpose, sitting on the porch in the evenings telling stories to an audience that included 3 domestic cats and 1 increasingly impressive bobcat. "Your eyes look brighter lately," Charlotte observed one afternoon when she stopped by with fresh vegetables from her garden. Eldon chuckled, watching Sage teach Pepper and Caramel how to stalk a butterfly in the backyard. "Must be all the kids in the house. Keeps me young." "Kids," Charlotte repeated, smiling. "That's exactly what they are, aren't they?" One afternoon, Eldon decided to teach Sage things that might help him survive when he returned to the wild. Eldon had been a hunter once, before Beatrice had gently turned his heart toward different pursuits. He still knew how to read wind direction, how to identify animal tracks, how to move through the woods without making a sound. He took Sage to the edge of the property where the forest began. Marble came too, watching from a respectful distance as Eldon showed Sage how to test the air, how to distinguish between the scent of deer and elk, how to recognize the signs of other predators in the area. Sage was a quick study. His instincts filled in what teaching couldn't convey. Within weeks, he was catching mice in the garden, his movements precise and economical. He'd bring them to Marble first, laying them at her feet like offerings, waiting for her approval before eating. The domestic cats learned from him too. Sage would set up elaborate ambush scenarios in the backyard, teaching Pepper how to crouch properly, showing Buns how to use cover effectively. When Eldon got a robot vacuum, a gift from Michael, accompanied by a rare phone call, Sage treated it like the most dangerous prey imaginable, stalking it through the house while the other cats watched in fascination. One morning, Eldon couldn't find his rubber work boots anywhere. He searched the house, the porch, the garden shed. Nothing, finally. 3 days later, he discovered them on the roof, accessed via the old oak tree that grew close to the house. Sage had dragged them up there and was curled inside them like they were a den, his body wedged into the boots in a way that looked deeply uncomfortable but apparently felt like home. Eldon stood in the yard, hands on his hips, looking up at a bobcat wearing his boots like a hat, and laughed harder than he had in 2 years. "Built yourself a little house up there, huh?" he called. Sage looked down at him with those golden eyes and made a sound that might have been contentment. Summer deepened. The heat drove everyone to find cool spots, the cats under the porch. Eldon to the basement workshop where he'd started carving again. Something else he hadn't done since Beatrice passed. He made a small wooden plaque with the names of all the cats, including Jam, and hung it by the door. Marble was slowing down. She was at least 7 now, maybe older, and her joints were beginning to stiffen. She slept more, moved with greater care, but she still groomed Sage every day, still supervised his training sessions with the younger cats, still watched over her unusual family with the fierce tenderness of someone who'd lost before and refused to lose again. One night, Eldon woke feeling feverish and weak, unable to get out of bed. By morning, his fever had spiked, and he could barely move. He managed to call Charlotte, who came immediately and insisted on taking him to the clinic in town. The doctor said it was flu, prescribed rest and fluids, and sent him home that night. As Eldon lay in bed feeling miserable and alone, Marble jumped up beside him, followed by Buns, Caramel, and Pepper. They arranged themselves around him, their combined warmth and purring somehow making the ache in his bones feel less severe. But Sage didn't come inside. through the window. Eldon could see him in the moonlight, sitting directly beneath the bedroom window. Motionless, he stayed there all night. When dawn came and the fever finally broke, Eldon saw Sage's silhouette still there, a guardian who understood his role even if he couldn't quite join the others in expressing it. Something warm moved through Eldon's chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Love. Yes, but also recognition. This creature that should have died in a storm, that had been raised by a cat who wasn't his species and a man who didn't understand half of what he needed, this wild thing had chosen them as family. Not because he had to, but because family wasn't about blood or species or what made sense. It was about showing up, staying present, choosing each other day after day. Autumn came around again, a full year since Sage had arrived. He was massive now, sleek and powerful. Every inch the predator he was born to be. Eldon noticed that Marble no longer tried to keep him from exploring beyond the property line. She'd watch him go, calm and unworried, and she was always waiting when he returned. Those returns became less frequent. Sage would disappear for a day, then two, then three, but he always came back. Usually with something: a leaf, a feather, once a small branch from the wild plum tree. He'd lay these offerings near Marble's favorite sleeping spot, gentle despite his size, before settling down nearby. One October morning, Sage came home with a long scratch across his shoulder, the wound angry and fresh. Marble, though stiff with age, immediately set to work cleaning it with her tongue. Her movements slow but thorough. She lay beside him the entire day, protective and present. Eldon brought them both food and fresh water, then sat in his chair watching them. "Motherhood doesn't need shared blood," he said softly. Not sure if he was talking to them or to himself or to Beatrice's memory. As fall deepened and Marble grew weaker, Sage's behavior changed. He began bringing her food mice he'd caught, kibble from his own bowl, and once, a brilliant red leaf that he placed carefully beneath the photograph of Beatrice and her kitten. He didn't stay to be acknowledged. He simply left his offering and walked away, out to where the wild plum tree blazed with autumn color. By November, Sage was larger than anything in Eldon's house except the furniture. He could barely fit through the cat door anymore. One morning, Eldon opened the front door for some fresh air and found Sage standing in the yard, facing the forest. The bobcat looked back once, his golden eyes meeting Eldon's, holding that gaze for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away, not hurrying, not hesitating, the quiet, confident stride of a creature that knows exactly where he belongs. Marble didn't chase him. She stood at her spot by the window, the same window where she used to sit with Jam, and watched him go. Her green eyes held something Eldon recognized: not sorrow, not loss, but a deep, abiding understanding that some loves mean letting go. Eldon moved to stand beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. "He's grown," he said quietly. "He chose his path, just like every child must." Winter rains returned to Montana with a vengeance. The house felt emptier now, but not in the way it had before Marble and her kittens arrived. This was different, not abandonment, but transition, the natural progression of things. One night, during a particularly fierce storm, Eldon woke to a sound on the front porch. He got up and looked through the window. There was Sage, soaked and massive, curled up on the porch directly on top of Beatrice's old blanket that Eldon had left there weeks ago for this exact possibility. The bobcat's breathing was steady and deep, his eyes closed in sleep. Eldon started to reach for the door handle, then stopped. Opening the door would break something, some boundary that needed to exist now. Instead, he simply turned off the porch light and went back to bed, letting Sage rest in peace. The visits became a pattern after that. Every few weeks, Sage would return. Sometimes he'd come close to the house, sleeping on the porch or beneath the oak tree. Sometimes he'd only appear at the edge of the property, visible from the window but maintaining his distance. Always, he'd stay for a while, then disappear back into the wild. Then one morning in early December, Eldon looked out the window and saw something that made him catch his breath. Sage was on the porch, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a female bobcat, slightly smaller but equally magnificent. and two cubs no bigger than Sage had been when Marble first brought him home. Sage was showing them his first home. Eldon moved slowly, carefully opening the door and stepping out onto the porch. He didn't approach, just lowered himself into his old rocking chair and sat quietly, hands folded in his lap. The female bobcat watched him intently but didn't flee. The cubs tumbled over each other, exploring this strange new place with wide, curious eyes. Inside the house, Marble appeared at the door. She was frail now, moving slowly, but she held herself with the same dignity she'd always had. Sage saw her and immediately lowered his head in a gesture that was unmistakably respectful. The cubs, seeing their father bow, did the same. It was a moment outside of time. The old cat and the wild one she'd raised, acknowledging each other across the divide of species and circumstance, bound by something that transcended both. They stayed until afternoon, the cubs playing in the yard while the adults rested in the weak December sun. Then, as the shadows began to lengthen, Sage stood and made a low sound. His family gathered, and together they walked toward the tree line, at the edge of the forest. Sage looked back one more time. Then they were gone, melting into the trees like they'd never been there at all. Marble watched from the window, her tail curled around her paws, her expression calm. Eldon sat beside her, his hand resting on her back, and said what they both knew to be true. This is family. It's whole now. The visits became a ritual after that. Every week or two, Sage would appear beneath the bedroom window, Marble's window, and bow his head. His cubs would follow his example. Practicing the gesture of respect their father had learned from a domestic cat who'd refused to let a storm claim another life. They never stayed long, maybe an hour or two, but they always came. As winter deepened and snow began to fall, Marble spent more time sleeping. The younger cats, Buns, Caramel, and Pepper had grown into adults themselves, calm and confident in ways that reflected the unusual household they had been raised in. They'd curl around Marble, keeping her warm, while outside Sage would sometimes appear and settle on the porch, a silent presence in the night. One evening, when fresh snow was falling and the world was hushed and white, Eldon sat with tea growing cold in his hands and watched through the window as Sage lay on the porch. His cubs nestled against him, while inside Marble dozed with the younger cats nearby. The scene had a symmetry to it, a completion that felt like the final note of a long, complex song. That night, Eldon placed Beatrice's blanket by the window again, the one she'd crocheted 30 years ago in colors of cream and blue. When he woke the next morning, Sage was there, lying on the blanket with his eyes closed, snow dusting his spotted coat. Eldon stood behind the curtain, not wanting to disturb the moment, and whispered words that had been forming in his heart for months. He's my son. He has a home in both worlds. Outside, the wild plum tree stood bare against the winter sky, its branches holding snow like a promise. In spring, it would bloom again, more brilliant than ever, because that's what life did. It persisted, it adapted, it found ways to continue, to grow, to love across boundaries that seemed absolute until someone, a grieving cat, an old man, a wild creature with a domestic heart, proved they were anything but. Eldon picked up his fountain pen and finally finished the letter to his son. "Dear Michael," he wrote, "I wanted you to know that I'm doing well. More than well, actually. I've learned something important this year. Family isn't just the people we're born to or the ones who share our blood. Family is whoever shows up in the storm. It's whoever stays when staying is hard. It's whoever teaches us how to be brave, how to be kind, how to let go when the time comes. I've found family in unexpected places, and it's taught me that love has no boundaries except the ones we build ourselves. I hope you're finding the same in your life, whatever form it takes. The door here is always open, son, for you, for everyone. That's what home is, a place where you can always return, no matter how far you've wandered, no matter what you've become. Love, Dad." He folded the letter, addressed the envelope, and set it by the door to mail in the morning. Outside, Sage rose from the blanket, stretched in the way of cats both wild and domestic, and looked at the window one more time before heading back to the forest where his family waited. Inside, Marble purred softly in her sleep, surrounded by her kittens who weren't quite kittens anymore, dreaming perhaps of a tiny spotted creature she'd found in a storm and refused to abandon. And Eldon Brooks, who'd thought his heart had finished its work of loving, discovered that there was always room for grief and joy to coexist. Room for the world and the domestic to share space. Room for family to mean whatever you needed it to mean. The grandfather clock ticked on, marking time in a house that was no longer too quiet, that held within its walls the evidence that healing came in unexpected forms. Sometimes it arrived on four paws in the middle of a storm. Sometimes it grew too large for the space you'd made and needed to find its own way. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it came back again and again, bowing its head beneath your window, teaching you that home was never just one place but anywhere love was willing to meet you. In the distance, the wild plum tree waited for spring. Every rescue begins with a heartbeat that refuses to give up. We're grateful you chose to listen to this one. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, a simple like or subscribe means the world to us.